The wind howled over the battered town of Greystone, whistling through broken windows and rustling the loose tarps that hung from rooftops like forgotten flags. The sun had long since dipped behind the mountains, leaving the land cloaked in an uneasy twilight. For weeks, rumors had spread of something terrible moving across the northern territories, towns going silent, roads deserted, people vanishing without a trace. But Greystone was isolated, tucked away behind forests and rivers. Many believed they were safe. Until now. Mira Patel stood on the rusted water tower at the edge of town, binoculars pressed to her eyes. A former city engineer turned scout, she had sharp instincts, honed by survival, not training. What she saw tonight sent a chill through her spine. Shadows were moving in the distance, not just one or two, but a wave. Dozens. No, hundreds. She tapped her radio. North Ridge. Movement confirmed. We've got incoming. Lots of it. Crackling static answered her before a voice cut through. Copy that. Is it them? It's not people, she said grimly. Get the others ready. We're out of time. Below, the town burst into action. Floodlights flickered on, casting harsh beams over sandbag barricades and boarded-up streets. The emergency siren wailed once, a long, echoing cry that summoned the defenders. In the central square, 5 figures gathered around a hastily spread map, lit by the cold blue glow of a solar lantern. There was Elias Grant, a former military strategist who'd taken charge when the mayor vanished during the first outbreak. Beside him stood June and Marcus, a pair of siblings who had grown up in Greystone and knew every hidden passage and tunnel beneath it. The fourth was Lena, a quiet mechanic with unmatched skill in crafting traps and defense rigs. And last was Jonas, an old survivalist whose cabin had more weapons than books, and whose knowledge of zombie behavior had saved the town more than once. Elias slammed his hand on the table. They're moving faster than we thought. We were supposed to have another week. We won't last a night if we don't hold that north entrance, said Marcus. Jonas grunted. Then we make our stand. Just like we planned. Hit him hard, keep him confused. No hero moves. Lena spoke up quietly. I've finished the new spike launchers. Set them up on Main Street in the alley choke point. Elias nodded. Good. Myra's up top scouting. We hold positions and fall back in stages if we have to. We've trained for this. As the group split up to rally defenders, the first low moan drifted over the hills. Faint, but unmistakable. In the dark beyond the barricades, the shapes emerged, twisted silhouettes stumbling forward in an unending tide. Their eyes glowed faintly with a strange, sickly sheen, and their movement was disjointed, almost erratic. These weren't the slow shamblers from early days. Something had changed. From her perch, Mira could see it all. The horde moved like a wave crashing through the forest, tearing down everything in its path. And at the front, she saw them. Larger ones. Smarter. Leading the pack. These aren't regular infected, she whispered. Then all hell broke loose. The first row of zombies hit the metal barricades with terrifying force, slamming bodies against it like battering rams. Traps exploded, flames and spikes and shrapnel flying through the air. The defenders held their ground, unloading arrows, bolts, and carefully rationed bullets. Elias barked commands from the watchtower. Don't waste shots. Aim for the joints. Keep the noise down. Jonas, crouched behind a flipped truck, launched a fire canister that exploded mid-air, lighting up the street like daylight. Screams echoed, human and not. From the rooftops, June and Marcus fired in tandem, picking off the faster ones trying to flank. But despite their preparation, the undead kept coming. As Mira scrambled down the tower to join the others, her heart pounded. These weren't just mindless biters. There was coordination. Purpose. Something, or someone, was guiding them. And as the town of Greystone prepared for its longest night yet, the group who would become known as the Nightfall Warriors began their desperate battle for survival. They had no idea this was only the beginning. The flames lit up the sky like a second sunrise, casting flickering shadows on the walls of Greystone's battered buildings. Screams echoed across the town as the undead wave surged, relentless and howling. Mira crouched behind a broken fountain, reloading her crossbow, every muscle tense. The air smelled of fire, sweat, and something far worse, decay. "They're breaching the alley." June's voice crackled over the radio. "We need backup now." Marcus sprinted down the back street, ducking under a low beam and vaulting a makeshift barricade. "Hold the line. Don't let them circle us." Lena triggered one of her traps, a wall-mounted device that fired steel spikes into the street. 3 zombies went down instantly, but 2 more pushed right past their fallen, one crawling along the ground, fingers scraping the pavement like claws. And still, the larger ones moved in the rear. Mira watched from her new post atop the old library. These weren't ordinary zombies. They moved with strange precision, like predators testing defenses. One of them, a hulking figure with armored skin and limbs that twitched like they were barely holding together, stood motionless under a street lamp. Its head tilted as if studying the humans. Then, with a low growl, it raised a massive arm and pointed. That's when everything changed. From the sides, zombies surged with sudden coordination, throwing themselves against the wooden and metal barricades with renewed fury. Myra's eyes widened. They're reacting to commands. This thing, it's directing them. She relayed the information. "We've got a new type out here. Bigger. Smarter. Call it a brute." Elias, in the town square, gritted his teeth. "Understood. All units, prioritize the big one. If it falls, maybe the horde scatters." But that theory would be tested brutally. Jonas, crouched near the north wall, had his long-range rifle aimed at the brute. He exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, and the bullet struck the creature in the shoulder, hard enough to drop an ox. The brute didn't flinch. It turned its head slowly toward the rooftop Jonas was hiding on and let out a roar that shook nearby windows. And suddenly, the creatures surged toward that position. A new type peeled off from the group, thin, hunched, fast as lightning. They moved in zigzags, their bodies twitching like broken marionettes. "New type incoming," Jonas shouted. "They're fast, too fast." Lena, already predicting a flank, activated her backup trap, a shock net fired from the ground. The electric web snared 2 of the fast ones, sending them into violent spasms before they dropped. But one got through, scaling the side of the building. Jonas didn't have time to aim. The creature lunged, he dodged back just in time, slamming it off the ledge with his rifle butt. It shrieked as it tumbled to the ground and twitched until still. "These things are evolving," Lena muttered. The battle raged deep into the night. Greystone's defenders held their ground, but barely. Ammunition ran low. Makeshift barricades began to crumble. And every time a creature was put down, 2 more seemed to rise in its place. By dawn, the first wave was repelled, but at a cost. The streets were littered with smoldering bodies and broken structures. A dozen defenders had fallen. Marcus limped back to the square, bleeding from a gash on his leg. Lena had a deep bruise along her ribs. Myra's arm was burned, and Jonas was still watching the trees with cold eyes. "They weren't just attacking," he said to Elias. "They were probing. Testing us. Something, or someone, is controlling them." Elias looked toward the horizon, where smoke still rose from the woods. "If this was just a test," he said quietly, "then the real attack hasn't even started." No one spoke after that. The group knew now, this wasn't a mindless infestation. This was war. And the Nightfall Warriors were just beginning to understand their enemy. "Would you like me to continue with part 3? Dawn broke over Greystone with a muted, gray light. The usual bustle of the town was absent, replaced by the eerie quiet of a people forced into survival. The streets, once lively and full of the mundane noise of everyday life, were now deserted. The few remaining townsfolk moved like ghosts, eyes wide and frantic, as if afraid to make a sound. The barricades had been reinforced, but everyone knew it wasn't enough. Mira stood at the edge of the town, staring into the dense woods that bordered Greystone. Her mind raced with the images of the previous night, the brute, the fast-moving creatures, and worst of all, the growing realization that this attack had been no accident. Whoever, or whatever, was leading the zombies, had a purpose. "Any word from the radio tower?" Elias' voice broke her concentration. He had joined her, his expression tense, but there was an edge to his calmness that Mira had come to recognize. "No, nothing yet," she said, lowering her binoculars. "I've been keeping watch, but there's no sign of their next move." "They're going to hit again soon," Elias muttered. "That much is certain. We need to prepare for whatever comes next. The real battle's still ahead." Jonas and the others had already begun organizing the survivors into smaller units. Lena had been busy reinforcing the defenses and rigging more traps, while Marcus and June kept working on the makeshift barricades. "We've got enough ammunition for one more fight," Jonas said as he walked up, checking his rifle. "After that, we'll be relying on our wits and whatever we can scrounge." Mira felt a knot tighten in her chest. She knew they couldn't win by just holding out. The enemy was adapting too quickly. There had to be a way to stop them before it was too late. Her thoughts were interrupted by a distant, eerie sound, a low, vibrating hum that seemed to come from the trees. Myra's eyes darted to the horizon. At first, she thought it was the wind, but then she saw it, movement, too coordinated to be just a natural breeze. "They're coming," she whispered. Within minutes, the front gate was under assault again. But this time, it wasn't the usual mindless shuffling of the dead. It was methodical, calculated. The zombies weren't rushing the walls, they were surrounding them. "Get inside the perimeter," Elias shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Don't let them divide us." The survivors scrambled to take cover, but the zombies were closing in faster than they anticipated. Mira could see them now, scattered across the woods and fields, moving in organized waves. Some were crawling, others standing motionless, their eyes scanning for weaknesses. At the back of the horde was the brute, its hulking figure impossibly large against the backdrop of trees. This time, it wasn't leading the charge, it was observing, waiting. Myra's heart pounded. The realization hit her hard. The zombies weren't just attacking, they were learning. The larger, smarter creatures were testing the defenses, figuring out where to strike, and then retreating to let the lesser zombies do the work. "We need to focus on the ones directing them," Lena said as she rushed up behind Mira. "If we take them down, the rest will fall apart." "Do you have a plan?" Mira asked, barely holding back her panic. Lena's eyes were hard. "We bait them. Draw them out. We have a few places with high ground that can give us the advantage." Elias, who had been listening intently, turned to the group. "We'll draw them into the trap. Lena, you set the detonation points. June, Marcus, start fortifying the second line of defense. Jonas, Mira, provide cover fire. I want to know everything about those creatures we've been fighting. Study them. Get ready." As the plan was set into motion, a deep, guttural roar echoed through the trees. The brute's eyes gleamed red as it raised its arm, signaling the start of the next wave. This time, it was clear, the zombies weren't just acting on instinct. They had a leader, and that leader had a plan. The survivors quickly fell into position, each person knowing their role in this deadly dance. Myra's pulse raced as she scanned the horizon. The forest was alive with movement, the trees trembling as the horde advanced. And in the distance, she could see the brute lumbering forward, its massive figure cutting through the woods like a juggernaut. Jonas raised his rifle, his finger hovering over the trigger. "This is it," he said grimly. "We either win this fight, or we die trying." Mira nodded, tightening her grip on her crossbow. There was no turning back now. The hunt had begun, and it was only a matter of time before the Nightfall Warriors faced the full force of the enemy's power. Would you like to continue with Part 4? The tension in Greystone had reached a boiling point. The survivors had fortified the town's perimeter as best they could, but Mira knew it wouldn't be enough to stop what was coming. They needed to be smart, quick, and above all, coordinated. The plan was simple in theory: draw the zombies in, use the terrain to their advantage, and eliminate the leadership. But Mira could feel the weight of their desperation pressing down on them like a storm ready to break. The sun had set again, casting the town in darkness. The barricades were reinforced with wood, metal, and whatever scrap the survivors could get their hands on. Every building was a potential stronghold, every street a possible battleground. From the high ground on the north side, Mira watched as the first signs of movement appeared, slow, deliberate, just as she had feared. "They're coming," Mira whispered into her radio. "Get in position." Elias's voice crackled back with a sharp command. "No mistakes. We bait them into the eastern alley. Once they're in, we move fast." Lena, with her usual precision, had set up her traps along the narrow street, hidden behind piles of debris. Cables and wires crisscrossed the ground, attached to concealed explosives. They weren't a full-on assault, just a distraction, something to lure the zombies into a trap where they could be picked off. But Mira could tell there was more to this plan than just a few well-placed bombs. It was a gamble. Jonas, positioned with a sniper rifle on the roof of the town hall, had a clear view of the eastern alley. He scanned the area, his eyes narrowing as he spotted the first signs of movement through the trees. "Here they come," he said quietly. "And they're not alone." The sound of rustling grew louder, and the first of the zombies appeared on the outskirts of the alley. But Mira wasn't focused on them. Her eyes were trained on the trees beyond, the figures who led the horde. The brute was there, its hulking form barely visible in the shadows, flanked by several of the faster, more intelligent creatures. "They're getting smarter," Lena muttered as she crouched beside Mira. "It's not just about numbers anymore. They've learned how to coordinate. They're waiting for us to make a mistake." Mira gripped her crossbow tighter. "They won't wait much longer." As the zombies began to shuffle closer, Elias's voice came through the radio again, steady and commanding. "Wait for the signal. The second they cross the line, you hit them hard." The moment of truth arrived. With a sharp click, Lena triggered the first of her traps. The ground beneath the zombies' feet erupted in a series of explosions. The blast sent several of the creatures flying, but most were undeterred, pushing through the smoke and dust toward the next line of defense. The fast ones darted forward, their bodies low to the ground, while the brute advanced slowly, relentlessly. Jonas fired from his perch, his shot landing square in the head of one of the fast-moving creatures, but the horde barely slowed. Mira took aim next, her crossbow releasing a bolt that pierced another zombie's skull. Still, they kept coming. The zombies were relentless. "Move in," Elias commanded. The survivors sprang into action, darting from their positions into the maze of alleyways and abandoned houses. They had to fight on their terms, not the zombies. Mira and Lena sprinted into position near the old pharmacy, the place where they'd set up a final fallback point. They knew the zombies wouldn't be fooled for long. The brute's group was closing in fast, and if they didn't take it down now, they'd lose any chance of regaining control. Lena dropped to one knee, pulling a device from her backpack. "The decoy's ready. We'll use it to draw them further in." Mira nodded. The decoy, a massive mechanical lure designed to look like a human, but with a hollow core packed with explosives, was their last-ditch effort. It would give them enough time to get behind the brute, but only if they could draw the horde in without being overwhelmed. The decoy rolled into the middle of the street, lights flashing erratically, a clear sign to the zombies that a human was nearby. Almost immediately, the horde shifted. The brute's head snapped toward the sound, and the other creatures responded, surging toward the false target. "This is it," Lena said, pulling the cord on her device. A second explosion rocked the street, sending a shockwave through the alley. The decoy's body was obliterated, but the blast did its job. The zombies, including the brute's group, were drawn further into the trap. Jonas fired from his rooftop again, hitting the brute in the chest. The creature staggered, but it didn't fall. It roared, a guttural, thunderous sound, and reached for the nearest survivor, Marcus, who was holding his ground just ahead. But before it could strike, Lena triggered the final trap. A net of steel cables shot out from both sides of the street, enveloping the brute and several other creatures. The zombies fought against the net, but it held them long enough for the survivors to close in. With one final coordinated strike, they brought the brute to its knees. Jonas fired one last shot, hitting it square in the head. The brute collapsed, its massive body crashing to the ground. The horde paused, their leader gone. For a moment, there was silence. Then, without warning, the rest of the zombies broke into a wild frenzy, charging toward the survivors with renewed fury. "We've only got a few minutes," Elias shouted. "Hold the line." The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, the survivors had a chance. The horde's fury was unrelenting. With the brute's fall, the remaining zombies surged forward, like a tidal wave crashing against a fragile dam. The survivors were scattered, fighting to keep their ground in the chaos. The trap had worked, at least partially. They'd taken down the brute, but now the real test had begun. Myra's pulse raced as she scanned the field, her crossbow loaded and ready. She had to keep her head in the game. The plan had been simple: set the trap, neutralize the brute, but the rest of the undead were still a threat. The noise of battle filled the air, gunshots, screams, the sickening sound of undead jaws snapping shut on whatever moved. "We can't let them overwhelm us." Jonas's voice crackled through the radio. "Fall back to the town square. We hold the line there." The survivors regrouped, moving with precision despite the chaos. Lena and Elias led the charge, pushing toward the town square with June and Marcus covering their flanks. Mira and Jonas took up positions at the rear, providing cover fire as the others moved. The alleyways were no longer safe. The zombies were too many, their numbers overwhelming the survivors' defenses. Myra's heart pounded in her chest as she fired another bolt, taking down a zombie that had crept too close. But there was no time to relish in victory. The next wave was already coming, and it was stronger than before. "Keep it together," Lena shouted, her voice sharp. She was always the one to push them forward when the odds seemed impossible. "We fight for every inch." Jonas, perched on the roof of a nearby building, had the best vantage point. His rifle flashed as he took out one zombie after another, but even his steady aim wasn't enough to slow the relentless onslaught. "We need a plan B," he muttered to himself, reloading his rifle. "A better one." Myra's eyes darted across the battlefield, watching as the zombies advanced. She could see the way they moved, almost methodical now, as if they were being guided by something or someone. Her mind raced. They needed to cut off the horde at its source, take out whatever was controlling them. But that wasn't possible, not yet. The zombies were everywhere. Elias's voice came over the radio again, urgent. "They're flanking us. Prepare for a full-scale assault." Myra's stomach clenched. They had to hold the square. If they lost it, the horde would swarm them. They would be trapped. "They're not giving us any room to breathe," June said, gritting her teeth as she fired off a few rounds. "How long can we hold them back?" "Long enough," Elias answered with a grim determination. "But we need to move, and we need to move now." Lena, always the strategist, had already thought several steps ahead. "We have to thin them out," she said, signaling for the others to take positions along the barricades. "There are too many to fight head-on." Mira took a deep breath, stepping back to the center of the square. She could see the panic beginning to set in among the survivors. Fear was creeping in, and it was contagious. They had to focus, stay calm, stay together, or everything would fall apart. "I've got an idea," Jonas called down from the roof. "Lena, cover me. I'm going to set up a perimeter charge at the western entrance. It'll slow them down long enough for us to regroup." Lena nodded, her eyes narrowed in concentration. "Go. Just make it quick." With that, Jonas took off, moving swiftly toward the western barricade, while the others focused their efforts on slowing the oncoming tide. Mira and Lena took the northern side, keeping the zombies at bay with a barrage of well-aimed shots. But then the unexpected happened. From the corner of Myra's eye, she saw movement. A small group of zombies, faster than the rest, broke from the main horde and moved toward the town's only open entrance, the one Jonas had just left exposed. "Jonas, behind you!" Myra shouted, but it was too late. The zombies had already reached the gap. Jonas spun around just in time to see them closing in. He raised his rifle, firing, but there were too many, too fast. His shots rang out, but the creatures were already on him, dragging him down to the ground in a brutal, frenzied assault. "No!" Myra screamed. Her heart stopped as she watched Jonas struggle, fighting off the zombies with everything he had left. But his rifle slipped from his hand, and the horde closed in on him. Lena's eyes flicked to Myra, and without a word, they both made their move. Myra charged forward, her crossbow ready, while Lena flanked from the side, picking off zombies one by one. It was chaos. The town square was now a battleground, with the survivors caught in a desperate fight for survival. Myra's hands shook as she fired, each shot a lifeline, each kill a small victory in the midst of a growing nightmare. But despite their efforts, the zombies kept coming. They were everywhere, too many, too relentless. Jonas's screams echoed in the chaos, but there was nothing they could do. The time for hesitation had passed. It was do or die. Myra gritted her teeth. "We're not losing anyone else. Would you like to continue with part 6? The chaos in the town square reached a fever pitch as the survivors fought tooth and nail to push the zombies back. Myra's heart pounded in her chest, but she couldn't afford to slow down. Jonas was gone, and with him, a piece of their hope. The horde didn't care, every moment was an opportunity to advance, to destroy. But the survivors had learned one thing over the past few hours: they couldn't let fear control them. Fear was what the zombies fed on. "Move! Move! Move!" Elias shouted as he sprinted past Myra, swinging a makeshift axe in a wide arc, taking down a zombie that had gotten too close to Lena. The barricades at the western entrance were failing. The zombies were pushing through in droves, and soon, the survivors would be surrounded on all sides. Myra's mind raced. They couldn't hold out forever. There had to be another way out. A plan. Something. "Lena!" Myra shouted over the noise of the battle. "We need to retreat. Find the underground tunnels. They lead to the outskirts of town." Lena's eyes flicked to Myra for a split second before she nodded. She was already heading toward the old library, where the entrance to the tunnels was hidden beneath the floorboards. But getting there wouldn't be easy. The zombies were everywhere, closing in, and with every step, the survivors found themselves fighting not just for their lives, but for their very survival as a group. Elias and June followed Lena, while Myra stayed behind, keeping the rear clear. Her crossbow shot another bolt into the face of a zombie that was almost upon her, and she quickly reloaded, barely able to catch her breath. She had to buy them time. Time to escape. Time to regroup. But there were so many of them now. The streets of Greystone were a sea of undead, each one with an insatiable hunger that wouldn't stop until everything was consumed. "Go!" Myra shouted as she backed away, her eyes scanning for the next threat. The survivors were near the library now, but it wouldn't be long before the zombies caught up. Lena and Elias had reached the library doors, and with a quick yank, Lena pulled them open, revealing the dark interior. The stench of decay hit them immediately, but it was a welcome smell compared to the burning reek of death outside. "Move inside, now!" Lena barked, ushering everyone into the safety of the library. Myra shot another bolt, but this time, she didn't wait to see if it hit. She turned and sprinted for the door, the sound of heavy footsteps following close behind her. She could feel the presence of the undead getting closer, the vibrations in the ground as they closed in on her like a living nightmare. Just as she reached the door, one of the faster zombies grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the ground. She kicked and fought, struggling against its grip. But it was too strong. Its jaws snapped inches from her face. With a final burst of strength, she brought her elbow down hard on the zombie's skull. It let out a horrid shriek before collapsing to the side. She didn't look back. She didn't have time. She dove into the library just as the doors slammed shut behind her. The survivors were breathing heavily, their faces pale from exhaustion. They had made it inside, but the battle wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Lena quickly sealed the doors, barricading them with bookshelves and whatever she could find. "We're not safe yet," she said, her voice calm but tinged with urgency. "The tunnels are this way, but we have to move fast. The zombies are already gathering outside." Elias, his breathing ragged, nodded. "How far are the tunnels?" "Not far. But once we're in, there's no turning back. We either make it to the outskirts, or we stay here, and die trying." June, who had been quiet until now, looked around the room. "We've lost too much already. We can't give up now." Mira wiped the sweat from her brow, trying to steady her breathing. She was exhausted, physically, mentally, emotionally. Jonas's face flashed in her mind, but she pushed the thought aside. Now wasn't the time for mourning. "Let's move," Mira said, her voice strong. "We don't have much time." The survivors moved quickly through the library, following Lena's lead. The dark corridors of the building seemed endless, the walls closing in on them as they descended deeper into the ground. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the silence, broken only by the distant growls of the zombies outside. Myra's hand gripped her crossbow tightly, but she knew it wouldn't be enough. The real danger was in the tunnels themselves. They could be trapped down there, cut off from the rest of the world with nowhere to run. At the bottom of the stairs, Lena paused and turned. "This is it. Once we go through, we're in for the long haul." Mira nodded. "We're not turning back. We'll make it through." With one last glance at the others, Lena pushed open the heavy door leading into the tunnel system. The survivors stepped into the darkness, the weight of their journey settling in. The tunnel stretched out before them, twisting and turning through the earth. There was no turning back now. "Would you like to continue with part 7? The silence in the tunnel was oppressive. It felt like the very air itself had thickened, closing in around them. The only sounds were the faint scuff of shoes against the cold, damp floor and the distant, almost inaudible growls of zombies above. It was a strange kind of quiet, the calm before the storm, and it made Myra's skin crawl. As the group moved further down the tunnel, the darkness seemed to stretch endlessly before them. They had no clear sense of time now. It felt like hours had passed since they'd left the town square behind, and even longer since they'd seen daylight. Lena led the way, her flashlight cutting a narrow beam through the gloom. Elias walked beside her, a hand on his axe, his eyes flicking back and forth in search of any movement. June, carrying a rifle, stayed close to Mira, who kept her crossbow ready, even though her arms were beginning to tremble from exhaustion. "We can't keep going like this," June said quietly, her voice thick with fatigue. "How much further?" Lena turned her head slightly, her face grim. "Not far. The exit's near." Myra's heart skipped a beat. "The exit's near," she repeated under her breath, as if trying to reassure herself. They needed to get to that exit. They needed to escape before the zombies above found their way into the tunnels. The tunnel walls seemed to close in around them. Every step echoed in the narrow space, and every footstep was a reminder that they were not alone. The survivors had fought their way through waves of zombies, but now, trapped in the underground, they were more vulnerable than ever. The air was thick with dampness, the walls slick with moisture, and it carried the faint, unpleasant scent of mildew and decay. It felt like they were moving through the belly of the earth itself, far away from the safety of the open sky. And for the first time since they had entered the tunnel, Mira felt the creeping sensation that something was very wrong. She wasn't the only one who felt it. "Do you hear that?" Elias whispered, halting mid-step. His hand gripped his weapon tightly as he looked around, his sharp eyes searching the darkness. Mira paused. She strained her ears. At first, she heard nothing but the hum of her own breathing and the occasional drip of water from the tunnel's ceiling. But then, there it was, a faint rustling sound, like something scraping against stone. The group froze. "Stay quiet," Lena whispered, her voice barely audible. She waved for them to spread out, slowly inching forward, but their steps were slow, cautious, like they were all waiting for something to happen. Then it came, a distant growl. A low, guttural sound, but it wasn't like the typical growls of zombies they had heard above ground. This one was different. More deliberate. More intelligent. Myra's blood ran cold. "They're down here, too," she muttered, her voice barely a whisper. She tried to steady her breath, but the words tasted bitter on her tongue. The zombies weren't just above. They had infiltrated the tunnels. Lena glanced back, her expression fierce. "We move faster. Stay in pairs. We need to make it to the exit. Now." The survivors quickened their pace, but now, their steps were hurried, frantic. The sounds of the growls seemed to grow louder, more menacing, as if the creatures were closing in. Suddenly, a series of scraping noises echoed through the tunnel. It was unmistakable, the sound of claws on stone. "Get ready," Elias whispered, his voice tight with tension. He gripped his axe with both hands. Mira couldn't shake the feeling that something was stalking them. She felt it in the pit of her stomach, the sensation that they were not just being pursued, but hunted. And then, as if to confirm her fears, the first figure emerged from the shadows, a zombie, its body a twisted, grotesque version of its former self. Its skin was pale, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light, and it moved with unnerving speed. More followed, emerging from the dark recesses of the tunnel like hunters closing in on their prey. The group immediately fell into defensive positions. Lena and Elias were the first to engage, slashing at the oncoming zombies with their weapons. June fired off shots, each bullet taking down one of the zombies, but it felt like there were always more behind them. "Fall back!" Lena shouted, her voice strained but resolute. "We can't stay here." But the zombies were relentless. They were fast. Faster than the ones above ground. Mira shot another bolt, narrowly missing one of the zombies as it lunged toward her. She didn't have time to reload. Instead, she grabbed the nearest object she could find, a broken piece of pipe, and swung it with all her strength, knocking one of the zombies back. But it wasn't enough. There were too many of them. A scream cut through the air, and Mira turned to see June fighting with one of the zombies, her rifle knocked from her hands. It was already on top of her, its sharp claws scraping at her arm. "No!" Mira screamed, rushing forward to help. She swung the pipe down, knocking the zombie away from June. But there were more, too many more. The survivors were surrounded, their path forward blocked, their retreat cut off. The exit seemed a lifetime away. Lena looked at them, her face determined. "We're going to have to fight our way out. Would you like to continue with Part 8, the final part?" Part 8, the final stand. Approximate, 695 words. The air in the tunnel felt thick with the weight of impending doom. The survivors were now surrounded, the shadows filled with the glowing eyes of the zombies that pressed in on them from every side. There was no escape, no safe corner to hide in. The only choice left was to fight. "Stay close!" Lena shouted, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "We make our stand here. We don't have time to run." Elias nodded, gripping his axe tightly, his face set in grim determination. He wasn't ready to die. Not like this. Not without a fight. The others took their positions, their weapons ready, hearts pounding in their chests. Myra's crossbow was her only option now, but she knew it wouldn't be enough to hold them all off. The first zombie lunged at them with a guttural roar, but Lena swung her machete with expert precision, cutting the creature down in one clean motion. The group moved in unison, swinging their weapons, shooting when they could, and knocking down anything that came too close. Every strike, every shot, felt like it was just a temporary delay, but they didn't have the luxury of giving up. Myra's crossbow bolt hit its mark, piercing a zombie's skull and sending it crashing to the ground. But she didn't have time to rejoice in the small victory. Another zombie was already lunging for her, its claws swiping through the air. She sidestepped, her heart racing as she pulled another bolt from her quiver. She shot again, this time taking down the creature that was closing in on her. "Stay focused," Lena shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. The survivors were holding their own, but it was clear that the odds were stacking up against them. The tunnel was filling with more and more zombies, their relentless pursuit never ceasing. Suddenly, a terrifying howl echoed through the tunnel. Myra's blood froze in her veins. It wasn't just a growl, it was something far worse. Something they hadn't heard before. "Move! Now!" Elias yelled. But before they could take another step, the source of the howl emerged from the shadows, a massive, hulking figure, its skin a twisted, decayed version of the undead. Its eyes glowed with an eerie light, and its limbs were longer, its claws sharper, as though it had evolved beyond the usual zombie form. This was no ordinary monster, it was something more, something far more dangerous. The creature charged at them with terrifying speed, its monstrous growls reverberating through the tunnel. The group scattered, but it was too fast. It grabbed Elias by the arm and tossed him across the tunnel like a rag doll. "Elias!" Lena screamed, rushing to his side. But the massive zombie was already upon her, swinging its claws at her. She ducked just in time, but it was clear that they were outmatched. They couldn't defeat this thing by sheer force. "We need to get out. Now!" June shouted, her voice desperate. Mira knew she was right. The exit was their only chance. But the tunnel was now a battleground. Zombies were swarming in from every direction, and the hulk of the mutated zombie was tearing through their defenses with terrifying ease. With a final, desperate push, the group began retreating, fighting their way toward the only hope they had left. Lena and Elias covered the rear, taking down as many zombies as they could while the others made their way toward the tunnel's exit. The monstrous creature was hot on their heels, its bellowing roars filling the air. "We're almost there," Lena shouted, her voice tight with exertion. But the moment they reached the door to the exit, disaster struck. The mutated zombie launched itself at them, its claws tearing through the air. It was too much for them to handle, too fast, too strong. Elias took the brunt of the attack, pushing Mira and Lena toward the exit, but in the process, he was grabbed by the creature, its claws sinking into his chest. "No!" Lena screamed, but there was nothing they could do. With one final, heart-wrenching scream, Elias was torn away, pulled into the darkness, lost to the monstrous beast. "We have to go now," June cried, dragging Lena away from the door. They stumbled through the exit, the tunnel's mouth just ahead. The sunlight was blinding after the long hours in the dark, and for a brief moment, the survivors felt the warmth of the outside world. But they couldn't stop now. "Keep moving!" Mira yelled, her voice hoarse. With heavy hearts, the group ran through the wreckage of the town, the zombies' cries fading into the distance. But they didn't stop. They couldn't afford to. They would fight, they would survive, but not for themselves alone. They were survivors, and they were going to rebuild. They had to. The world around them was lost, but they had each other. And for now, that was enough. End of Nightfall Warriors, How a Group of Heroes Held Back the Zombie Waves, Zombies Audiobooks. That concludes the 8-part story. I hope it works well for your YouTube channel. Would you like any edits or changes?